Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight, and I'd also like to pay respects to elders past and present. If everyone could please stand for the council prayer.
We've been up for the...
Not necessarily, but I have in the past done it that way. Yes. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the city of Clarence. Amen. Thank you. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and what is said at this meeting is not protected by privilege, and there is a link to the agenda papers on Council's website. I note we have one... I'll start that again. We have no apologies tonight. We're all present, but we have two aldermen online joining us. Most welcome, Alderman von Berto, Alderman Kendi. Item 3, declarations of interest of alderman or close associate. Alderman Ewington.
Yes, Mr Mayor, item number 8.4.1.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Moving on to item 4, which is a number of items that we'll vote on as a consolidated motion once we've moved through them. 4.1, confirmation of minutes for the 23rd of May and the special council meeting on the 31st of May. Minutes as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. Item 4.2 is Mayor's communication. I'd like to table the significant diary entries for myself and the Deputy Mayor, and also Alderman Warren represented on a couple of occasions as well.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, I just asked for an addition to those because I was pleased to represent you on Wednesday night last week at the Rosny College School Musical of Chicago, which is an outstanding production. And as always, Rosny College does a wonderful job, and I can't believe the depth of the talent of that age group. So it was an honour to be there on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alderman Warren. No other comments in regard to that item? Item 4.3, Council notes the workshops conducted on the 30th of May, 6th of June, and the agenda briefing on the 10th of June. Thank you. Moving on to item 4.4, tabling of petitions. General Manager?
No petitions, Mayor.
Are there any from the floor? Thank you. Item 4.5, reports from outside bodies, single and joint authorities. We have a report from the Copping disposal site. Joint authority later in the meeting?
Indeed.
Thank you. Alderman Walker, and there's nothing to report from Tas Water or Greater Hobart Committee. Are there any other reports from committees, representative bodies? Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I table the minutes of the Youth Advisory Committee, the Cultural History Committee and the Events Special Committee.
Thank you. Alderman
James, I think it is, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
The minutes of the Howrah Community Centre, minutes of the 31st of March 2022. So I'll table those. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other reports? Thank you. Moving on.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I did have my hand up.
Sorry, Alderman Kendi.
I did have my hand up, yes, thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
do it again. I'd like to electronically table the minutes of the Belrive Community and Arts Centres meeting of the 5th of June.
Thank you, Alderman Kendi. There being no other reports, move on to item 4.8. That the information in the weekly briefing reports for the 23rd and 30th of May and the 6th of June be noted. Alderman James.
I'll formally move the motion and then speak to one of the items as listed on the agenda. Thanks,
Well, I take it you're moving the omnibus motion, which we normally do after we dealt with business. So I'm happy to take any questions you've got on this item now.
this item?
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's in relation to the 23rd of May, the weekly briefing report, and also to do with an update on the Howrah Beach water quality investigations on page 7. Through you, Mr Mayor, could we have Mr Graham just give us an update in relation to that, please?
Certainly, Mr Graham.
Through Mr Mayor, this is actually through Mr Tui's portfolio in terms of work rather than asset management. So I can't actually give any more advice just at the moment as other than actually what's actually indicated in the weekly briefing report, which does note the status of everything at the moment. But if we need to give any further update on this.
Alderman Jones, perhaps out of session you could be more specific with the further information you need.
Yes, it's in relation to the on the last page, further actions, and in particular, dot point 2 under further actions, signage at the stormwater outfalls is recommended, warning that swimming should not take place within a certain distance of the outflows, approximately 50 metres, but appropriate distance to be determined. So that was really what I was aiming to seek information, and perhaps the General Manager may be able to take that on notice to advise us as to when signage will be installed in that location.
Certainly, thanks.
Thank you.
Could I have a move and a seconder then that the weekly the omnibus item be accepted?
I have a question on the weekly briefing report, Mr.
Certainly, Alderman Moller.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the weekly briefing reports, we are advised of a ministerial decision in regard to deferring the decision on Richardson's Road and the application by those developers to extend the urban growth boundary. And that decision is based on wants to avoid conflict whilst the Greater Hobart Plan is under consultation and discussion. Mr Mayor, what are the implications of this decision for the Skylands proposal?
Mr Lovell.
Through Mr Mayor, I might add to that introduction in that it's not just the Hobart Plan that the Greater Hobart Plan that is pending. There are at least 2 other studies that the Minister is referring to, including an outer urban or outer townships study that's being done too, and all of those things have some relevance to any urban growth boundary proposal, including the Skylands one. However, this is something we intend to follow up. It's in the interests of all of the councils to follow up as to whether this is kind of a line in the sand decision for all requests or whether it pertains to specific scenarios. So there is a difference between 52 Richards Road and Skylands in that the Skylands one abuts an existing urban growth boundary where in the urban area that's covered by the Greater Hobart Plan proposal, and the 52 Richardson's Road isn't. So there is some uncertainty about exactly whether or not the Minister is suggesting that, as I say, a line in the sand has been drawn, or whether it pertains to particular scenarios like 52 Richardson's Road.
Could this matter actually be addressed in the minutes if we have an answer by then, or if not at some very early stage? Because I think it's quite an important issue for people in the community to cross.
It is an important issue, and I think a key point that Mr Lovell made was that Skylands project is within the Greater Hobart Plan itself, whereas Richards Road is outside that. So that's significant, but undertake to provide the additional information that you're on.
Mr Mayor, it is significant in the fact that the Greater Hobart Plan doesn't include Richardson's Road, yet the Greater Hobart Plan is being used as the reason why Richardson's Road is being deferred. So
it's worth a further explanation. Thank you.
It certainly is.
Are there any other... Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I refer to the weekly briefing report of the 6th of June and the page 6, smoke-free signage upgrade for Aussie Bus Mall. And just to draw attention to this, Mr Mayor, this is something that a number of residents have been keen to see happen for some time now, and I congratulate and thank Mr Brennan for the work he and his team have done in this regard. to upgrade the signage, and hopefully we can ensure that that part, the Rosny bus mall, will be smoke-free and it'll be enforced, and everyone will be aware of where they're able to smoke, when they're not able to smoke, so people can have a clean and healthy environment.
Thank you. Alderman Ewington.
Just on that one, Mr Mayor, if I could just also make a comment about that. I did see that report.
Yeah, go on. I'll permit
now appropriate time to make a suggestion to it, or was it just in relation to, I noted that the laneway was not designated as smoke-free from the car park to the mall itself. I wonder whether there was any other community feedback about, because a lot of people walk into the post office box as the post office. I thought that would be appropriate to include that in that smoke-free area.
We'll take that on notice.
Yeah,
thanks,
that would be
Alderman
great.
Ewington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any other comments?
Yes.
In that case, Alderman Pears, I think you moved the omnibus motion. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Walker. All those in favour? And it's against. Alderman Kennedy, I'll take your hand up. Yes, okay. I'll declare that unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to public question time. There are no matters at point 5.1 and 5.2. There are answers to questions previously taken on notice in the agenda. We'll take those as read. And there are no members of the public we're here tonight, so there are no questions without notice. And we have no deputations from members of the public either. I'd like to advise that Council is now sitting as a planning authority under Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And the first item there is item 7.1, a development application of 155 Blessington Street, South Arm for a dwelling. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thanks, Alderman Mulder. Second, Alderman Ewington. Alderman Mulder. Any comments?
No, I'll just encourage my colleagues to support this motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Alderman James.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. My question through you to Mr Lovell in his capacity as Manager of City Planning. On page 15 under advice, it refers to, and I quote, a works in road reservation permit must also be obtained if any proposed works are to be conducted within the road reservation or council land. So the works, do they refer to any building or any construction that's going to be built in the road reservation, or is that road reservation going to be an access to the building site and therefore it needs to have some permit by council for work to be undertaken? I just seek clarification.
Mr. Lovell.
Through Mr Mayor, yes, those works will be the crossover, and we take this opportunity to let people know they will need approval before they go too far.
Thanks.
Any other speakers? No need for right of reply. I'll take it, Alderman Muller. Put the motion that's recommending approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 7.2 is a development application at 20 Hill Street, Belrive, for additions and alterations to an existing dwelling. I move and second Alderman Ewington. Thank you. Alderman Blomley. Alderman Ewington.
No, thanks, Mr Mayor. I think it's quite reasonably addressed in the officer's report. I encourage my colleagues to support it, and if there's any need to address any issues, I'll leave that to the end.
Thank you. Alderman Blomley.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Other speakers? Okay, so I'll put the motion which is for approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. That concludes our business as a planning authority. Next item on the agenda is under financial management, 8.3.1, the estimates. I'd like to advise that this is one agenda item, so there will be the opportunity for one debate, but I will hold each of the 5 points as a separate ballot, if everyone's clear with that. So could I have someone move the entire motion as it is so that we're able to have a full debate, please? Okay, well, we'll have to deal with each one with a
Hold
separate...
on.
Thank you, Alderman Edmonds. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. So this is just to put it on the table so we can have a full debate, and then after that I'll hold separate ballot on each of the 5 points. So the motion is on the table, moved by Alderman Edmonds, seconded by Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Edmonds.
Rightio. Didn't expect to find myself moving the estimates capital expenditure program fees and charges 2022-23 when I walked in here tonight. But however, if we're all a bit slow getting our arms out for probably different reasons, I can move it with the proviso that there is one of the dot points that I won't be supporting. This document, I suppose, is the good, the bad and the ugly, to use probably a well-worn out phrase when it comes to describing budgets. I'm sure if we went back over the last however many years, someone somewhere in Tasmania has probably said that every single year about the budgets that we have to pass. But I think in the circumstances that we are faced with, dealing with the challenges of a lag from things such as a rate freeze, that was put on us during COVID, which we're still obviously in the grip of, and the pressures that we're under in terms of things like CPI, the cost of petrol, and indeed in more recent days the cost of turning the lights on, and issues around delinking from national markets that didn't or that was promised and never occurred. So these are all cost of living factors that hurt people in households, but they do hurt this organisation as well. We have to drive the same cars. We have some electric cars, Mr Mayor, as you're aware, but not a great deal. So the whole spoonful that we've got here of Robitussin tasting rate increase of 4.82, I believe, sort of goes down with one gulp, I suppose. So there's certainly some positives, though. The dealing with some structural issues in the organisation. I think we've got a good story to tell there. Some generational change in our operations, but also some identified need that simply couldn't be put off any longer. That was probably heavy lifting that might have been able to be done by previous iterations, not necessarily generations of this council. I think when we look at some of the positions that we've had to establish in this budget, wouldn't it have been nice if that was established in better circumstances. Nevertheless, we are less than the CPI. As I said, we do have to put fuel in the same cars, keep the same lights on, pay the same staff. I think Alderman Warren may have posted something today on Facebook about if the do-nothing cost was going to be around 8%. So if we were a bunch of lazy fat cats just ticking and flicking and getting on with our lives, the impact on people's households would have been a lot greater. We all know, because we've all sat around on Zoom, trying to get this number as low as possible whilst delivering appropriate services for our community. More broadly, this has been a brutal term of council, really. We had one rosy budget that we sort of wanted in, and for at least 4 of us, it was our first budget with this council, and ever since then the rug's been pulled out, basically, in terms of revenues, enforced rate freeze, and then basically playing catch up from that. So the legacy of that is that there's not been enough infrastructure projects delivered. I don't think anyone would argue there have been enough, and some very, very, very worthwhile projects aren't in this budget, which I might touch on in some of my remarks soon. I am pleased, though, that hard rubbish survived the cut. I think whilst it might have been low-hanging fruit for a certain number off the percentage, I think the feedback from our community would have been very brutal. But as we said in the discussions, that this is something we can look at going biannually and explaining to people that keeps a number on the rates notice lower. But I think it's a public conversation that we have to have rather than a last-minute decision of a budget that's under pressure. Negative, as I said, point C, which I won't actually be supporting tonight, the cost of the waste levy / bin tax and the cost of going to the tip, I can't support. My public position on that is well established. Indeed, when we voted on it 18 months ago, I was one of the people who didn't support our endorsement of that tax. I think others will probably talk about this. Lindisfarne Ridge, that's disappointing that the way that's been shuffled out. I also don't support the juggling of the books we've done around the Lindisfarne Football Club cash-in waiting. I know others have reasonable opinions on that are contrary to mine, and that's fine. We're in a place where we can disagree with each other, but that's one thing that I would like to have seen dealt with differently. And I also think that
thank you, Alderman Edmonds. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Like Alderman Edmonds, I wasn't planning to second this motion, but we did need to get the conversation open. We've all done the hard yards with this, and probably none more than the officers that have had to work through this process with us. And I think one thing we'll all agree on, that this isn't perfect and not necessarily where we wanted to land with a number of items, but it is where we've landed. So I look forward to hearing my colleagues' contributions, but I am happy to second this motion.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and may I say from the outset that this is a hell of a hike, 4.82%, when the other metropolitan councils are coming in, and that's in the Hobart metropolitan area basically, is between 2.2, 2.5 or just under 3%. Clarence's rates over the last 6 years, 2017 were 2.30, 18 2.60, 2019 2.90, 2020 0, 2021 3.77, 2022 4.82. How can we justify in election coming up in October that we are the big spending council within the Hobart metropolitan area? All the other councils have gone through a very stringent process, and we have as well. But at the end of the day, how can we go out there and say that this council has basically gone through and delivered essential services, and then on top of that we have provided other services which are nice to have? We've lost our way on this, because if 4.82 gets up, then lo and behold, what will the people think? That this council, which is basically debt-free, it has one of the best capital works program that has been developed over the last 10 years. And we need to return to the delivery of basic core services. Rates, rubbish, and also roads, stormwater, and the waste levy. And these are what I believe are essential services. And some of these other plans and master plans and so on can be left and put on the back burner. And then we can actually say to the people of Clarence that we have looked at this very closely, and therefore we haven't really addressed the issues that other councils have in the immediate area. It is disappointing that the 10-year financial plan, which has been addressed under Part F, was flagged by the prior CFO, who said that there would be a discussion on this prior to the budget 2022. It didn't happen, and therefore in this particular motion, Part E, it refers to that it has been reviewed when it hasn't been reviewed, because it was basically dropped on our lap as part of the process just prior to it. This council is basically debt-free, but to slug the ratepayers of Clarence with 4.82, it is just an absolute minefield, and I can't, for one, support that, because I believe that we could have done a lot better. Employee costs, there's 1.3 million for 15 new places, new positions within the city. 1.39 million. And the only one I can really support there is one truck driver compactor, the blue collar. The rest are white collar workers within this administration. And already we have decided to go off.
Alderman James, I think it's absolutely incorrect to infer that white collar workers aren't doing a good job and doing a very important job.
I didn't say that, Mr.
Okay,
Mayor.
well, thank you. Just as long as that's clear.
I didn't say that. I didn't say. I'm trying to draw parallels in relation to this. The other point that I want to raise is that the capital works program that has been listed in the council papers, there's 9.78 million that's going from rates to prop up the capital works expenditure. Now, we had discussion about this, and we could have decided that not as great amount as 9.78 million from rates to go actually into the capital works. We could have applied a smaller amount, and therefore that wouldn't have had a greater impact as it has on the rates, resulting in the 4.82. As I mentioned, there's 2 loans, and both of those are basically going to be paid out within the next 3 years, so we are basically debt-free. Mr. Mayor, this is not a good budget. It is really basically putting us at odds with the other councils, and for the look of it, how in the hell can we justify going into a council election in 2022, October this year, when all the other councils have been, I believe, much closer to their constituents, to their ratepayers, and therefore they have seemed to me have done a better job and haven't brought their rate increase up to the 5.8 that's been suggested by the mover of the motion. I will not support this, and I hope that my colleagues, in light of what's going to happen in relation to selling this in October 22, that we throw out Part A of the estimates and therefore send it back to the officers.
Thank you, Alderman James.
Thank you.
Other speakers, please. From Mulder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some grave concerns about the capital projects and whether they will be able to be delivered for the amount that's been estimated in the estimates and in the capital works program. And I say that because in the last month or two, we've seen things like the Reserve Bank raise interest rates. We've seen the, and I might say that was 2 years ahead of when they said they would. And the language has been changing and getting more and more severe, and there's nothing to suggest that they're on a hold where they are. Inflation has taken off. Fortunately, in Australia, it hasn't quite hit the marks, but in places like the United States, it's running around 9%. This is all, the alarm bells are ringing all over the place. Yet here we are saying that we're going to deliver this amount of projects, despite the fact of the cost of labour and the commercial environment, the cost, as we found with Alma's, of extrapolating costs of construction, shortage of materials, and all these costs. And I'm just wondering that I have a feeling that we won't get very far into the year before we start shuffling money around, before we start bringing money out of the capital reserve in order to fund this particular project. And that's my concern, and I've argued very strongly during the whole debate about there are lots of things in there that are nice to haves. They are not needs to have this year. They are nice to haves for years when the financial outlook is a little more stable and we can be guaranteed of actually delivering some of those. So I think that the quantum is far too great for where we're going. And my other point relates to the rate rise. I still, after all these years, find it completely irrelevant to compare our percentage rate rise with neighbouring councils. What we need to do is what is the basic rate on an average house in those cities where there isn't a large commercial district, as there is in Hobart and Launceston, that cross-subsidise the residential rate. And there's no doubt about that. We do have a commercial base, but it's not remotely anything near the quantum of the others. So if we're going to talk about rates comparisons, we need to look at the residential rate, or how much in actual dollar terms, are we charging compared to neighbouring councils? And that would be a genuine indication as to whether or not our citizens are getting value for money, or whether we are being responsible, or dare say I, irresponsible in giving money to these nice-to-have projects. Like others, I have some reservations about some of the recommendations, but we'll have to wait for that.
Other speakers? Alderman Warren and then Alderman Walker. Okay, Alderman Walker, Alderman Warren's deferred to you.
As you wish. It seems we're playing the slow game, and I've played the slow game before, and I'll let you know that sometimes the Mayor closes the doors and you've been warned. He gives fair warning. Look, here we are, and I don't like 4.8%. It is a significant number compared to where we've been in the past. Yes, it's 1% below the inflation cost in Hobart for that time. So I'm not patting myself on the back about that. It's better than 5.8, but it's still a significant number. And it was pointed out that this is an election year. Well, so what? I say, guess what? This is a job for grown-ups, and and if you're going to be a grown-up in this job, sometimes you've got to sell messages that aren't easy, or you can use the credit card. You can whack it up on the credit card, and then you can say to future Clarence residents, you can pay for that later. Now, there's no shame in putting debt for intergenerational assets. It's quite reasonable to go to someone to say, yep, you're still paying this asset off, but you're still enjoying it, and it's a beneficial thing for the community. We're not doing enough of that, quite frankly, and the quality of life would be improved for our residents if we had some of the iconic projects that we have listed on our books delivered. And some of those are sad to see won't actually be done in this term. My pet project, Boom Boom, would be the state-of-the-art dog park. The costs are modest. There's some logistics around that, and I'm hoping that the staffing changes here will increase capacity as far as delivering projects. The other one is the fully funded demonstration site for a seniors outdoor exercise park. That's 100% state money doing that. It'd be nicer to be doing that sooner. However, even though it might not occur in this term, I believe that a better quality job will be done because there is now some academic and interstate interest in this project. It's not just a thing on the side. What is left out? Well, Lindisfarne Ridge is left out, and I think that's not good for 30,000. But as I said, part of this job is being a grown-up. And I faced down, and it wasn't well appreciated by some people when I said we shouldn't have included it to try and chance it at another level, just getting it rezoned there. That cost this project being done through the council mechanism over a year, and this would have been included in that budget last year, of which I'm very certain. So, people can reflect on how they went about that then. I am absolutely not supporting I'm absolutely not supporting point C. I hope point C goes down in flames. And the reason for that is that with fees and charges, if we're hitting people with, the fees and charges and a percentage rate should not be that different overall from the rates amount, and it absolutely is. If we get those quantums up to about, that 4.6% or something like that, that'll shave about 2.2 or 0.3% off the rates, and they'll pretty much match at about 4.5%. So I hope there's chaos there, and I look forward to, whacking that. And I will tell people straight to the face, you can't expect ratepayers to go up 4.8 and this to only go up, by a percentage that's, half it or only a bit over. So I look forward to that because I think that would be a reasonable and fair thing to do. Obviously, that would be that wouldn't be every single amount. It would be some up and some below to get there. Look, we're doing this budget perhaps in the absence of some other councils, and I wonder whether you're able to furnish me, Mr Mayor, with the level of asset renewal funding we are committing as opposed to what we're meant to commit. Are we hitting that 100% mark?
General Manager? Yes, we are.
So on record now you've said that we're 100%. How does that compare to the nearest other four councils? Are you able to
Off
give
the
me
top
that
of my
information?
head, I couldn't tell you. They all have differing approaches.
Okay. Are you able to get hold of that information for me? Not right this instant, but in good time?
Yes, I can take that on notice.
Week or two's time would be fine. Because here's where I see it. You know, we could quite easily play the game and get down to 2.3% and just totally fudge asset renewal. Easy peasy. Now that is Enron light. That is disingenuous. That is again saying to future generations, you pay more rather than the way that it's been going along. The asset renewal process at 100% is the fairest way for everybody and for each generation. But you can fudge. And I suspect other councils are fudging and they should be showing up for it. So where are we at? It's not much fun, but this is the job. And I wish this to be a sustainable and viable council. I think on metrics that we're looking pretty good. You know, again, I would like to know about balanced budgets of our council compared to others, so you can tell me about that as well.
Thank you, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to try and touch on some new points because there have been some very good points made. There's nothing in here that everybody is happy about, but we've done the best we can. I was trying to work out how many hours we spent on it. I think if it's an hour on Zoom, it's probably twice a normal hour anyway, but it's been a long and torturous process, and people have lost and won on various discussions. I would like to point out that, I'm not sure it's been mentioned, the CPI has gone up 5.8, and that directly affects our wages. In fact, that's our biggest expenditure is on wages. And so there was always going to be an increase. I absolutely reject the premise that the 15 new positions are not needed. If you read the report, it justifies each and every one of them. We have a duty to our staff to make sure that they have manageable workloads. That's not the case in some areas at the moment. We have a growing municipality, we have increased planning permits, we have a shortage of planning staff. Planning staff are difficult to attract and retain because of that very high-pressured environment, and that is an area where there's a statutory obligation to turn things around within 42 days. We do need the staff. We can only proceed with the staff that are available. And the other areas are all fully justified in the report, and I do refer people to that if they're wondering what those positions are. As I said, growing municipality, growing council, we need the staff to deliver the services that our constituents want. The other point I'd like to make is that often we have motions moved in this place, and there's been a bit of flack attracted for anyone who votes against something without having an alternate motion. So I would urge anyone who's considering voting against this to provide an alternate motion. What would you cut? What would you throw away? Which staff would you sack? And detail how you would get to a lower percentage than the one that we've achieved through hard work over the last couple of months or so. And I think it's very easy to just vote against something. It's much, much more difficult to say, well, here's an alternative package that delivers the services that our constituents need and want and brings in a lower figure given the current climate. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Alderman Warren. First speakers, Alderman Ewington, and Alderman Blomley first, I think, and then Alderman Ewington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And from the outset, I'd like to thank the CFO and her team, the General Manager and the Executive team for the work they've put into this process over what I'm sure has been many months. These things don't arrive easily, and as previous speakers have said, there's been a number of been a bit of pain involved here. There's been some give and take, and we're faced here with a recommendation for a 4.82% increase in rates, which in my view, Mr Mayor, is too big. It's too big a jump. In this process, we have to manage expectations, and we're here to represent the residents and ratepayers, if you like, the shareholders of our organisation. We are growing at a greater average rate for almost a decade now than anywhere else, and we know why, because people want to move here, they want to live here, they want to invest here, they want to work here, they want to raise a family here, and for that they also require services. They require a level of service. They require all the other associated facilities that one would necessarily expect in a go-getting, state-of-the-art city that Clarence strives to be. So I'm torn, to be honest, because from day one of this term in 2018, I said we need to step up as a council. We do need to step up, and there's some, in my view, there's some areas that we've failed to step up over the past 3.5, nearly 4 years. But we need to, when we make decisions, we have to have an eye always to the frugal yet strategic financial management of this city. And I'm concerned, Mr Mayor, that there are core services, what our residents and ratepayers expect us to deliver and to deliver well, versus those what's been described tonight as those nice-to-haves. The stuff that I don't describe as being core services of our city. And we can go through the budget papers, and they were raised during our sessions, different programs that are not core services. They're nice to have, sure, when we can afford them. But we're now facing tonight to vote on an increase of 4.8% in our rates. Now, as has already been raised tonight, we do need new staff. And of the 15 outlined here, I have absolutely no problem with them being employed, those positions being filled, because I actually think we do need to fill them. I think a number of core areas we're understaffed and have been for some time. And we've already referenced to the planning department this evening, and I know there's a shortage statewide, qualified planning staff members, and I know that our planning department does a top job. But just on staff, you look at the EBA that we have in place, the direct link and increase in salaries of 5.8%, which is, as we're told, the largest expense category facing us. Now, I wish, Mr Mayor, that I could give my staff a 5.8% increase. I can't. The business just doesn't cater for that, doesn't justify it. As much as I would like to do it, because cost of living, as Amoova touched on tonight, is going through the roof. But I can't justify a 5.8% increase. Now, I appreciate an EBA has been signed, it's there, we have to deliver on it. But that sort of stuff really does concern me. Mr Mayor, not to take away from all the work over many months that's gone into this, but I will just reiterate now that I have some grave reservations about a 4.82% increase in rates. And at this stage, Mr Mayor, I'm disinclined to support this recommendation.
Thank you. Alderman Yerington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This being my fourth go at a budget since being on council, you'd like to think the process is a little bit easier and you'd have a little bit of better understanding of how it all works. But to be honest, I come out of this last session even more concerned about some things in relation to how we go about setting the budget and how we strategically plan for what we do in this city. The key thing I want to start with, though, too, is that, I mean, as Alderman Mulder highlighted, I mean, we're dealing with a cost of living crisis, you know, for everyone in the community. I mean, the numbers are changing every day in relation to inflation, electricity costs, fuel costs, and all that sort of stuff. And a lot of that is driven by governments thinking they can come up with programs that can fix everything in the community. And I see that as a major issue that we face within council, where we think that running all these programs is going to be a way of making the lives better of people out there. And to be honest, I don't hear people telling me about how wonderful they think a lot of our programs are. I'm sure a lot of people don't even know what some of them are, and I'll detail some of that in a moment. I'd be happy with a 4% increase if we actually delivered on some of the things that I think are the core things that we should be doing and some of the things we've neglected in the last few years. You know, I mean, I think, I think Alderman Walker highlighted, I mean, we've delivered nothing in terms of a sport and recreation or a playground or a picnic area or some infrastructure out there that's going to put a smile on the community's face and make them feel good about living in Clarence and getting out there and engaging with other community members. I think we've neglected that, and that's reflected in the lack of, or the master plan that are sitting there, some of them 3, 4, 5, 6 years and still waiting, and that's my major concern at the moment. I note that, you know, in the budget here, in the budget papers, stated in the background that Council Strategic Plan 2021 to 2031 was adopted in April 21, and the budget is framed in consideration of the goals and strategies embedded within it. Now, that might be the case, but we've never had a discussion as a council about prioritising all of the things that are in the budget and the relative allocation of staffing and resources that we'd like to allocate those things to deliver on the things that we'd like to see happen. And this hasn't happened here. We've stated it to the Mayor and the GM on many occasions that we want to go down that path, and that didn't happen as part of our discussions with this budget, and I'm very disappointed that we didn't get to that point. Now, I think that's one of the most fundamental things we should have been doing, rather than spending time debating motions and issues, which I don't see as anything other than time wasting and not what we're really here to do as aldermen. The other thing is too, if I look at the other aspect of the papers here, it says that our guiding principles, capital service and establishment. The guiding principles in relation to capital service and establishment include that the capital budget adopts a focus on the long-term strategic asset management plans that balances renewal, risk mitigation and the development of new community infrastructure. Well, we've failed on the development of new community infrastructure, there's no doubt about that. Complete existing iconic master plans through continued community management, progressing to DA where possible. Well, that's another cross. We haven't done that. That council service delivery is focused on statutory, regulatory and core service requirements. Right? We're not doing that either.
Look, I just think it's very important. I think that needs to be tested, that you believe that this council's not performing its statutory functions.
No, I don't believe that we... Hang on. We're not focused on our core services, Mr Mayor, if I'll clarify that there. I believe we're fulfilling our statutory obligations. But really what this comes down to is that in this budget, we then see an increase of up to 25% in some of the other areas which I would call non-essential, in some of the community development and city culture areas, you know, coming out with more programs and more staff, up to a 25% increase in those areas, and yet we've got nothing in there to help us deliver on, you know, completing the iconic master plans through continued community engagement. We just don't have the staff to finish the master plans, go to consultation, do the design work, and the fact that we have left that out while expanding the budget in other areas is just something that I can't support. You know, we really need to be looking at allocating, like I said, and if we hold back on some of the capital works which we've done in this budget, in 12 months' time, we're still going to be no step closer to delivering on any of the things that are sitting there, whether it be Anzac Park, Gilston Bay, Victoria, Esplanade, Little Harrow Beach, Belroyd Beach and the Pavilion that I know other aldermen have said they support. Looking at increasing, you know, community amenity, putting a smile on people's faces. Something that's there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and doesn't rely on a program or a person sitting in an office or in a table writing papers about how they're going to make someone's life better. Build the stuff that people need and have been telling me that's what they want to see out there in our community. We've got a fantastic natural environment. We are just not doing our job and delivering on what is possible out there. You know, I mean, I look at, like I said, if you know, we've reduced our active recreation spend to $175,000, which I support, if we were increasing the resource allocation to catch up on the other stuff. We're just not going to get there. You know, I mean,
Thank you, Alderman Newington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Any else? Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Alderman Newington, because I'm 90% totally in agreement with you. Big projects, what have we got? A breakwater, that's about it. Wages have increased, and it's funny, I was talking to my accountant today and he was talking about wages and how, you know, the wages are going up and they can't afford to be paying them, but they've got to allow for it. Things that we're missing out of, you know, the Lindisfarne Footy Club, you know, they're disappointed, I know. The Lindisfarne Ridge project, you know, that's gone. I agree with other aldermen, roads, rates, stormwater, you know, things that we should be looking at. And as I said in the last newsletter, we're starting to get into state government things which we shouldn't be even touching. There's money there I believe we're wasting. You know, all my time on council, this is the first budget rate rise I'm disappointed in. I've got to admit, I do want the hard waste to stay in there because a lot of people do think that is fantastic. But I just believe we could have worked harder. I haven't brought an alternative motion in. we could have worked harder to get this down a bit, and I really think it's a really high number. Normally I'd support the budget without any worries, but I just wonder, I know we had hours on it, but I'm just thinking we should have cut more things out of it, made the hard... I told you it was a tough budget, but we should have made harder decisions. I'm really annoyed it is so much. I believe we should have cut it down to closer to 4%.
Any other speakers? Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In line with one of the guiding principles of the Council's 10-year financial plan, Aldermen and senior staff during the budget deliberations have focused on trying to balance the delivery of services and infrastructure to meet the community expectations whilst limiting increases in rates. As a number of aldermen have said, that's not an easy task. Whilst I generally agree with the activities put forward for the 22-23 estimates, I believe there are two areas where Council could have made savings, and they were discussed on a number of occasions, thereby decreasing the rating increase required. I refer firstly to the need for an annual hard waste collection. We looked at whether or not it could be other than annual, perhaps biannual. We looked at other options in relation to hard waste, through to not actually having a hard waste collection. That is at a cost of around about $400,000. And therefore, the rating increase could have been less if that had been left out. The other aspect is the proposed rental of a property in the Rosny CBD to house staff. And I believe that we should have had an expert assessment done first as to the current and future staffing accommodation needs, and to determine whether or not there is suitable space within the council chamber building and other buildings of council. I think this assessment is particularly relevant in light of a move to more working from home, commenced during the COVID pandemic, but something that's likely to continue to some degree into the foreseeable future. In relation to the capital expenditure program, there's one project which I don't support, and that's the upgrade of the Harrow Community Centre's caretaker cottage and the centre's switchboard and meter in order for the Hobart FM 96.1 radio station to lease that site, instead of staying at its current premises on the top floor of Alma's Activity Centre. I believe that the remainder of the $250,000 2018 election commitment state government grant for Alma's refurbishment should be used immediately to upgrade the external non-compliant stairs so that it's safe now, right now, for the radio station users to access and egress that part of the building that's being leased by the station. Another major concern for me is that in order to fund the transfer of the radio station to the Harrow Community Centre, $320,000 will be redistributed to this project from the Alma's Activity Centre refurbishment funding, which currently stands at approximately $1.5 million. My fear is that this is the start of depleting this funding so that there will be limited or no funds available for the Alma's refurbishment in the foreseeable future, and the facility will not recommence as a viable community centre in the Bellerive-Rosny area, which currently has no such facility. I believe that the rating increase is reasonable and modest in the circumstances in which we find ourselves, bearing in mind the macro conditions, particularly economic and health conditions. Council has been mindful of reprogramming, reinstituting its various activities after the major restrictions of COVID during the past 2 years. Council is being hampered in undertaking works by the large increase in materials prices, over the budgeted figures, and the lack of contractors and staff. Staff are Council's most vital resource, and they deserve to have acceptable salaries and wages and conditions. And this aspect has been factored into the estimates. I'm very pleased to support the increase in new staff, around about 10 new positions and some positions being made permanent.
Thank you, Alderman von Berto. Alderman John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And can I start by firstly commending both the CFO and all the staff for all the work they do to get this to us. For every hour that we put in, I suspect if they put in 3 or 4 hours along the way, there's a huge amount of work goes into producing these budgets. None of us like a rate increase, let's be honest, particularly one that can be seen to be comparatively high if we just look at raw numbers. And there are certainly things in this budget I don't particularly support. But that would be true for all of us around this table. We've all picked up things that we don't like. But that's why it's important that we all take part in this, that 12 of us with differing views and different interests and different communities we talk to actually take part in this process to ensure that all of those diverse views from all of the community get involved. So it doesn't matter whether you love or hate tracks and trails or sports grounds or parks or events. All of those views go into the mix and they all get considered because they are all important to some parts of our community. All that being said, and to pick up on some comments from Alderman Walker and Alderman von Berto, it is important that we are fiscally responsible. What we can't do is just push the can down the road by fudging the renewal reserve or trying to push things off to such a point that we don't have enough staff and it's unfair on them to try and get them to do the work that we're asking of them. It's been mentioned we are a growing city. We have been a growing city for a number of years. We need to recognise that and stop pretending that we could do the work that we used to do for 40,000 people with the same amount of staff. Now there are 58,000 people. It just doesn't work. It is unfair on our staff. It is unfair on the ratepayers because they then don't get the services they deserve. As I said, nobody likes a high rates increase. Of course we don't. But I think we have worked through this one extensively and it is a fiscally responsible number that we've come to.
Thank you. I'll hand the chair. I'll just make a couple of comments. I think, first of all, this is probably the most important decision as a council we face, the annual budget cycle, and whether we approach that and how we approach it is very important for our community. Of course, we are a democracy, but we also have responsibilities for corporate governance, corporate responsibilities towards the city. We all come with our own agenda to this council table. We all come with our pet projects. We've been through exhaustive workshops and negotiation sessions where we've all had to give or take a bit. Some of us have got our favourite projects up, some of us haven't. I would beseech all of you to acknowledge and respect the process we've been through, the fact that it's been hard, that we've had some wins and losses, but at the end of the day, we have a corporate responsibility to pass a budget for this city. I know there's concern about the rate rises. I'm most uncomfortable with it as well. However, when you face the reality of our non-discretionary expenditure, and include in that a 5.8% pay rise for our staff, which represents over 30% of our total expenditure, when you factor into the cost of inflationary pressures that impact on all the goods and services that this council provides, to come in a percentage under 1% under the inflationary factor, and let's face it, the inflationary pressures are likely to increase further in the years ahead. The fact that we can operate this council on a sustainable basis into the future is going to be vitally important. And certainly, I think under this case, 4.8% is a very responsible, mature and authentic figure that we need to keep operating and providing the services this council provides. I think it's terribly disingenuous for us to argue that we shouldn't put up the rates because there's an election coming up. Surely we have a responsibility to be honest with our community about the costs of what this council costs to run and the services we provide. I know that if we tried to shorten those services or pull back some of the services we provide, we get a dreadful reaction from the community. And Alderman Pearce pointed to that, for example, with the hard waste collection, which I actually do not support personally. But I accept that this council, the majority of aldermen, want to see it in there. And therefore it is in the proposed budget that we've got before us tonight. So I really do urge you to take into account all those factors, and I now call on Alderman Edmonds for the right to reply.
Thank you. And I'll just check this microphone is on, just so anyone at home is not clear. No one in this room is 100% happy with where we're at tonight. A few things to cover off. What might have been with wages? We've all talked about the pressure that's putting on rates. Potentially, would staff have taken predictability when we were having our negotiations rather than uncertainty? I'm sure our ratepayers would have. Some comments about hard waste. It's funnily enough that during the COVID budget, the rate freeze budget, it was me who said we should go biannual with that and didn't get listened to, like a lot of times, I guess. We all have those moments. But now it's not the time because we've got to have public discourse about it, and I'll get to why. Alderman Newington, I really agree with many of the points you made, particularly the one about strategic planning. There are a lot of philosophies that we haven't settled on as an organisation, I don't think. I think that's something that the new council needs to workshop early, with new members given an appreciation as to why it's being workshopped, well and truly ahead of our budget cycle. That's where we can get things like that out for public debate, and the other programs that almost everyone around this room has referenced, and we can have a proper debate about, is this a priority of the council? And we'll see what's left on the floor after that. There's some comments about performance budgeting and like-for-like comparison about other councils. I'm not going to verbal other councils, but I think some of the things need to be grounded in reality, and we're seeing at least one council coming out saying 8% was their bare minimum recently. Sorry, my notes grew out of size quite quickly. There are some comments around the table, so maybe this budget won't pass. If it doesn't, I guess what happens? We're back to the table and the razor comes out. Now, it'd be really interesting to see what gets shot in the head if we go through that process, because I think some people might be even less happy. In conclusion, I think it is worth thanking the officers for the hard work that has gone into preparing this document, the tedious hours that their significant others must have put into waiting for them to get home or to turn the computer off. I know certainly around our table it was very similar. I finished one budget session with my daughter asleep on my arm. But really, certainly for our employees, that hard work starts now to hit the marks, because here's the document, here's what you're to deliver, and all the best with it, and thanks for your efforts. And to sum up quite a big debate, I'd just like to say thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Edmonds. So, as foreshadowed, I'll be putting each element of the budget separately for the vote. First is that we adopt the estimates for financial year 22-23 as set out in attachment 1. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. The second item is the Council adopts the capital expenditure program for financial year 2022-2023 as set out in attachment 2. All those in favour? Alderman Kennedy and Alderman von Berto, how are you voting on that? I'm sorry, I didn't see. Okay, I'll call all those against. So the motion is lost. 6-all. Item C, the Council rescinds the list of fees and charges scheduled for financial year 22-23 as adopted by a Council meeting on the 2nd of May 23 and adopts the updated list of fees and charges as set out at attachment 3. All those in favour? Against? That motion is carried. And finally, penultimately, D, Council renames its COVID-19 financial hardship policy to financial hardship policy as set out in attachment 4. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. And finally, the Council notes the 10-year financial plan modelling was reviewed during the development of the 22-23 budget estimates, and the Council commits to a detailed review of the financial plan modelling ahead of finalisation of next budget estimates. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried.
Dan, could I just, could I please, if I'm allowed, no, I just need to check, did recommendation B, did that pass?
No, it did not.
No, it lost.
I counted 6-all lost.
For the benefit of anyone watching, what's the next step there then?
Perhaps the Mayor.
General Manager, are you able to explain the implications of having no capital equipment program?
Be more data on the workshop.
We will consider this at the next workshop. Thanks. Okay, moving on to...
There is a procedural motion, because I don't really see any way forward from this, other than more weekends. Can I put a procedural motion that you recommit B? Is that?
What I'd like to do is, do I have a seconder for that motion to recommit B?
Oh,
Revise.
Yeah.
oh.
Thank you. Moved, Alderman Mulder, seconded, Alderman Edmonds. So the motion is that we recommit B. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. So in recommitting B, that Council adopts the capital equipment expenditure program for 22-23 as set out in attachment 2. All those in favour?
It's a procedural motion.
Oh, yes, sorry, yes, sorry.
The procedural motion carries.
Yes.
So now I am recommitting the second point, which is to adopt the capital expenditure program for next year set out in attachment 2. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Thank you, Alderman Mulder.
We still want something to know.
Moving on to governance, Alderman Ewington, I believe you had a declaration for 8.4.1. .4.1, the Council approves the competitive neutrality and community service obligation policy. I'll move in a second, please. Moved Alderman Chong, seconded Alderman Pearce. Alderman Chong?
Just to say I support the recommendation. We obviously have a significant business in this particular case, but it's important that we continue to review to see where we have and deal with the competition policy as appropriate.
Okay. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, in business, I studied this very closely and I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Edmonds.
I don't support the recommendation. I've got some remarks to explain why. Clarence Pool originally, at least according to my research, opened in 1963 to fill a community need. It's well established as a community asset and provides overwhelming public good, teaching kids to swim, providing recreation and improving the health and well-being of the people, aka our people, who use it. What I'm concerned about is why is it that the council now needs to risk the viability of this community asset due to competitors moving into the same market? Those competitors knew the Clarence pool existed and obviously would have presented a business case that still showed their business as viable with the Clarence pool in operation. This scenario we're dealing with tonight reminds me of the rich people who decided to move into next to Club Surreal in Battery Point and eventually complained enough to get it shut down. In local government, we all know that the loudest voices are not always the correct voices. Millions in public money has been spent on this pool. I cannot support a change in policy that could eventually see it closed down. Indeed, we're looking at a future scenario that if this policy saw the pool go out of action, is there actually enough capacity in the private market to take on all the clientele that will be needing a home if the pool closes? Will we be faced with public demand to then reopen the public swimming pool? Now, we can't, or some of us can't control legacy decisions made by the Clarence Council or indeed other pool owners or operators. All I can do is look at this situation presented to me as a councillor on behalf of our residents. If we wave this policy through, I believe we risk the viability of the Clarence pool and we could create a disused community asset to gather cobwebs. Competition policy has already been weaponised to try and kill a public golf course. Are we now going to use it to kill a public pool? I will not be supporting this policy change or this motion.
Thank you, Alderman Edmonds. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, I don't support this policy for different reasons. A lot of these pools around the country were built after World War II in particular, when we decided that we had enough community halls over the day, and a lot of them were made into practical things like swimming centres. A lot of these pools have been community assets. I can't, there is no competitor to the Clarence pool other than the Hobart pool. Everyone else is running small pools, which are lap training pools or things like that. Olympic-sized swimming pools and with diving facilities and things like that, they're particularly things we don't balk about, building a great big arena for sports, but suddenly we're sort of going to say, because that actually competes. Blunston Arena, we kicked the Cricket Ground Football Club out of there, remember? The cricket and football clubs, we kicked them out of there and we sent them somewhere else. I don't see how this particular policy works. But, as we note, the assessment has been done, and under national competition policy, we are required to have a policy of this nature. That being said, I think that what we should do is we shouldn't be charging off on a one-off basis. If this is required, and we talk about now the governing competition principles agreement, the Department of which the Department of Treasury and Finance oversee, we see and we see all these policies and the regulators getting around. Well, why pick on just the Clarence pool when there are so many other, not just council, but publicly owned state, federal government? Where is the competition policy for the Institute of Sport, which sucks up billions, I would suspect, when there are little gyms around the corner? They're targeted people, I don't know. But this is a classic case of where LGAT should step up to the market, and we should have a comprehensive policy that deals with all the facilities. Clarence has only got the pool. Sure, the state government's got a few, and I'm sure other councils have got some as well. So what makes us think that, the danger we set is that we come up with a policy that's targeted directly at the pool, which, as Alderman Edmonds has pointed out, could very well be the death of the pool, whilst everyone else is running around without a policy like this, because no one's made a specific complaint about it. So if we're going to have a policy, I think we've got to be very, very careful about the policy and how it works with a publicly owned asset, which has been delivering a public good for much longer than the private business competitors would have? And if so, let's have that policy as a statewide, if not a national policy, because it is a national competition policy. So government needs to step up to the plate and work out how it's going to protect its interests in light of the national competition policy. So I won't be supporting this one-off policy targeted simply at the pool.
Alderman Bromley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we need to be pretty clear here. Let's be crystal clear. This is not about picking on the Clarence Aquatic Centre. What this is about is Council meeting our obligations under the National Competition Policy, including establishment of community service obligations in relevant circumstances. We have a requirement to do this. Local government organisations, as we're informed in our papers, Mr Mayor, are required to comply with the National Competition Policy in accordance with the Competition Principles Agreement and its associated application statements. Now, this came into being in the late 1990s, and as pleased as I am to see it before us this evening, Mr Mayor, as I expressed when this matter was workshopped a week or so ago, I'm surprised it's taken this long. I'm pleased it's here before us tonight, but I'm surprised it's taken this long. This is about compliance. Now, as we know, Council officers engaged a local appropriately qualified firm to undertake a review of the Clarence Aquatic Centre following a complaint made to the NCP, as I understand it. It was recognised then, identified as being a significant business activity. And it is the only one in our council. It is the only one at this stage. But as we know, council must review its business activities annually to determine if there are any other significant businesses. And there's a very clear reason why this occurs, Mr Mayor. And this is not against the Clarence Aquatic Centre. This is actually about ensuring that we comply with the principles of the National Competition Policy, that we ensure that there is a level playing field and that ratepayers' resources are not being used to skew that playing field. You know, there needs to be an understanding as to what this is. This policy is about council fulfilling our responsibilities as outlined under the legislation. It's a good policy, Mr Mayor, and for that reason I'm very happy to support it this evening.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have also some reservations with this policy. As Alderman Blomby just mentioned, a complaint has been made against the Clarence Aquatic Centre. Now, if this policy wasn't just focusing, as it seems to be, on the Aquatic Centre, and we looked at everything that may well come under that headline or banner or title, I'd feel a lot more comfortable. And yes, we did workshop it, but not at great length. And I think there was a number of us that sort of came away from the workshop wanting more information. I was one of them that did ask for some more information. So personally, I'd like to see, we talk about pushing things down the road to perhaps this is something for the next council, but I'm not quite sure why we're rushing it through right now with a focus on the pool, when this is, again, one of those wonderful things that we offer for the members of our community that have been using it for a very long time that may not be able to afford to access something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And nowhere within this policy document is there any reference to the Clarence Aquatic Centre. Nowhere, no reference at all whatsoever. So this is something that this council needs to bring into place because of the very nature of the National Competition Policy, and at least this council has on its books a policy and able to determine what is a significant business activity. On page 4, it refers to what is not a community service obligation, and this is the linchpin in this particular document, because a CSO, or what is not a CSO, it is outlined on page 4, and that refers to costs incurred in meeting regulatory requirements, environmental standards, implementation of a legislative requirement, corporate social responsibility activities, hardship programs, demand management, encouraging use of off-peak services, and governance and corporate functions. Now, where in that, given that a CSO would, as it does at the moment, apply to the Clarence Aquatic Centre, it does, as it does apply to a number of other activities, and hopefully next year we may have the public golf course at Rosny back on the books, and this council can make a determination as to whether or not that's with a new council, and hopefully the new council will bring it on and we get it up and running. And so that would be another, if that's going to be a significant business activity, Mr Mayor, as you would agree. So let's get it and put this into perspective. This is a good policy because it overarches all of those different requirements for a business activity, and nowhere in here does it say that the Clarence Aquatic Centre is one of those. It's to be determined along with the CSO and other factors that are involved. I think this is well done. It meets us basically in accordance with other councils, because they in turn will have to come on side with this. And nowhere within this document is there any reference to the Clarence Aquatic Centre. So I will support this because I believe it's right, and the council officers have brought this forward at an appropriate time.
Thank you, Alderman James. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I really resent that we're having to discuss this tonight, and it's absolutely disingenuous to say this is not about the Clarence Aquatic Centre. It stems directly from a complaint that was lodged against council and the operation of the Aquatic Centre. As far as the policy goes, sure, it's generic. It complies with the national competition, anti-competition policy legislation, but it means that we have to go through the process of proving that the Aquatic Centre provides a genuine service to people who need to learn to swim regardless of socio-economic status in a municipality that has one of the greatest coastlines of anywhere in Tasmania, and we need to make sure that all our children can learn to swim, that adults who are of lower socio-economic status can learn to swim, that they can't all afford to go to a private pool, nor would the private pool have capacity. So I'm sure we'll be able to prove all of that. It's a no-brainer, really. But at a time when we've just been talking about how tight our budget is and how we need to save costs, we're now looking at a number of staff having to spend a lot of time going through this exercise unnecessarily to prove something that we already know. So I really resent the fact that we have to do it. I don't have any problems with the policy itself. And sure, it's generic, it applies to everything, it's something we should be doing, but should we be doing it now? We wouldn't necessarily be doing it if that complaint hadn't been brought. So I'm still of two minds as to whether I support it.
Other speakers? John? Sorry. Alderman Walker.
Yeah. This could go either way. There's two aldermen that haven't declared a hand. I'm one of them. I just ask through you to the General Manager, what are the ramifications of not adopting this policy tonight?
General Manager.
Thanks for the question. We have a direction from the regulator to take certain steps. One of the deadlines for that is the 30th of June. This policy helps meet that. We have further work to do on the other side of 30th of June.
So we will have failed to have met it by not voting for it.
Yep.
Could that lead to a monetary penalty, or what are some of the implications that stem from it?
The consequence is there will be a report back to the Minister for Finance, Minister Ferguson, and there's no power in the regulator to take any particular action. That power rests with the Minister on the advice of Treasury.
Right. So look, I think our hand is forced with this, but I've still got free speech, and quite frankly, if you're part of the TER, good luck getting a job at the ACCC. This ruling doesn't cut it compared to other interstate jurisdictional bodies. It's clunky, it's blunt, and there you go. I wonder. You see, immunisations are a public good. Pharmacies put a markup on them. Medical centres put a consultation fee on it. I do wonder about the ramifications if I don't know, maybe the Pharmacy Guild decide they don't like local government delivering immunisation. I also wonder, out loud, rhetorically, what do commercial radio stations feel about leasing arrangements? I think that the two in Hobart, one's in North Hobart and the other is in the CBD. So I think our hand is forced that we have to do this, but there's going to be some interesting consequences that I suspect will flow from that. So I'm not totally. I feel that I'm probably going to have to vote for this, but there are going to be consequences, and they're not. They could be pretty far-reaching, and I think the TER have said here's some red tape, and we've decided to tie your hands with it. Not entirely awesome. We'll see where this flows.
Thank you. I'll hand to the mover of the motion to take the chair for a moment while I speak to this.
Okay.
I don't believe this policy has taken us in the wrong direction at all. This policy actually enables us to continue to operate major businesses such as the Clarence Pool without people being able to throw stones at us, without the bureaucracy being able to try and nobble us through national competition policy and the state interpretation of that. By articulating this policy, we can actually identify the money that we're putting into subsidising the pool as a community service obligation, and there's nothing in there to stop us continuing on with doing what we're doing, so long as we name up front what our community service obligation is and why we're doing it. So I'm not troubled by those concerns. I encourage you to adopt the policy because it's good governance and it actually protects us in doing those business lines that we want to do. Thank you. No other speakers. Alderman Chong, you have the right to reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And look, I understand the angst that people have about how we got here. I mean, yes, we started this whole journey because of a complaint that was made about the Clarence Pool. But that doesn't detract from the fact that having this policy and complying with the national competition policy is something that we need to do. It's carefully designed, this policy, to talk about dealing with significant business assets. Yes, at the moment, that's the pool. It could be something else tomorrow. But what this policy does is give us the capacity to assess those and decide what is a significant business for us. And, as Alderman Chipman has said, as long as we declare how we account for it, what money we put into it, and disclose that appropriately, it's not a problem. It's about ensuring that we do the right thing and be seen to do the right thing by running these assets. I think this policy should be supported. I think we need to be open and transparent about what we do and where we do it, and this policy will help us do that. And I encourage my colleagues to support it.
Thank you. So the motion is that Council approves competitive neutrality and community service obligation policy. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Could we recall Alderman Ewington, please? Item 8.4.2, the renewal of a lease at the Risdon Vale Community Garden.
Yes,
Alderman
Mr
James?
Mayor.
I think that was seconded by Alderman Kennedy. Thank you.
Yeah, was moved, but anyway, that's fine.
I think Alderman James was on his feet just before you put your hand up.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Speed of light, don't you?
This particular area is dear to my heart. So look, it's not necessarily because it's the new lease, but in fact it's going to give the community one of these sort of opportunities that really makes it stand out as far as what Risdon Vale has to offer and also what the community can be involved in. So, Mr Mayor, I have great pleasure in moving this motion, and on the basis that that once the notice of intention to lease is finalised and no objections are received, that in fact the council enter into a new lease agreement with the Risdon Vale Neighbourhood Centre for a term of 10 years from 1 January 2022, and the rental for the lease to be in accordance with council's lease policy, and I seek council support.
Thank you, Alderman Kennedy.
Yes, very happy to second this, having only been over there in the last couple of weeks twice, met the team there, see the work that's going on, and hearing some of the plans for what they're going to be doing in the future. I'm very thrilled to be seconding this, and I seek colleague support, which I feel very confident in getting.
Thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Yeah, I'm just, I'll be quite facetious. Are we not expecting a complaint under the National Competition Policy from the greengrocer in the village?
Are there any other speakers? I was going to use another adjective, but I won't.
Not for the speakers, I hope.
Thank you, Alderman Bomley.
Mr Mayor, I'm delighted to stand in support of this lease renewal, and I note that on page 139, it's stated 2.5, it states that the community garden is a hub for the Risdon Vale community. That it certainly is. It goes on, the last sentence of that paragraph, Mr Mayor, it says the garden is cared for by inmates from Risdon Prison, which gives them the opportunity to give back to the community and learn new skills. And that certainly is the case, Mr Mayor, but there are others that have also contributed to that garden. And I'm proud to say that 2 years ago, the hard-working state Labor member for Franklin, Mr David O'Byrne and myself, David O'Byrne MP and myself were at a morning tea where the former manager of the Risdon Vale Neighbourhood House, Mrs Ann Harrison, suggested the two of us, we might like to bring our shovels and our gardening gloves along the following week. We both turned up and she put us to work for about half a day in that garden. It was a lot of fun, but goodness me, Mr Mayor, we learnt some new skills. So it's a fantastic community garden, Mr Mayor, and I commend the lease renewal.
Thank you. It's amazing what a bit of cultivation can do for one. Any other speakers? In that case, write a reply.
I require it, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So the motion is that council approves the renewal of the lease and gives notice of such. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 8.4.3, establishment of the Southern Tasmanian Regional Waste Authority. We're being invited to approve the rules and authorise the GM to undertake administrative action necessary to approve the joint authority. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Looks like it's me.
Thank you, Alderman Walker. Yeah. Seconder? Alderman James, thank you. Alderman Walker.
Yeah, look, I think the reasons are set out in this area. There have been other bodies in the past with perhaps loose letters, but I would suggest that their effectiveness was somewhat diminished. Certainly made some good posters and some other things like that, but waste is a serious matter. It is a serious matter for a number of reasons. We need, and you know, there are changes coming through the sector. So recovery becomes a big matter. Illegal dumping is a big matter. And the other one I think that is often underlooked as is just the potential climatic impacts as well. So what we have going on when things are done right include the fact that we're now extracting methane that used to just go straight into the atmosphere. We're now getting that from the copping site, and we're potentially generating enough power at the moment to sort out the whole of the Tasman Peninsula. So this authority is going to take a more strategic approach. I think it will also be a way for the southern councils to be doing what the councils in the north and the northwest are doing, and if we're not hunting in a pack when it comes to negotiating with the state government, then we might find ourselves getting trampled. So I think it needs to go ahead, and I think that you should support it.
Thank you. Alderman Jones.
Yes, look, it's a great step forward, and we've basically done a complete circle, and I know Alderman Walker alluded to the Southern Waste Strategy Authority, of which I was Deputy Chair, and at that time, you know, Mr Mayor, this council, or the members of council at the time, decided that we should fold, and it was done through the appropriate process. May I say that one of the key planks of SWASA, Southern Waste Strategy Authority, and there's not much difference in the actual naming of this particular organisation, was in fact for a state levy, waste levy. And in conjunction with LGAT, we did in a partnership, did a promotion in relation to the state waste levy, and all of our members at the time of SWASA were in agreement that there ought to be brought this state levy into effect, and ultimately it has. And this particular organisation, one of its key planks is in fact to oversee waste management within southern Tasmania amongst those councils. So look, I can honestly say, and I know that my colleague at the time, Councillor Alex Green, he did put up a good fight. He came here and he spoke to the members of council at that time, and he spoke how that particular organisation had a lot of objectives. Some of it was promoting, as it was mentioned, the poster and making sure that we kept our beaches free of plastics and other debris, and of course the state levy. So that's been brought into fruition, and this particular organisation is going to basically oversee that along with other waste managing authority. So on behalf of my colleague, Councillor Alex Green, thank you very much, and hopefully this will be carried unanimously.
Thank you, Alderman Jones. Alderman Ewington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I certainly support anything that coordinates and rationalises council services across the range of councils in our region in southern Tasmania. You know, I think this hopefully will lead to you know, resource sharing and the opportunity for us to, like I said, better coordinate things. But my only concern is that you know, it doesn't end up costing us more money in the long run because we have more staff dealing with this aspect of what we do, plus staff internally in council, and over time hopefully it would see us being able to reduce possibly some of our costs that we incur directly through council. And I hope that, you know, we really look at, you know, because I mean the cost of living for people at the moment is a major issue. I think, you know, we've really got to be, you know, conscious of that over the next few years. Because I mean, I certainly support, you know, protecting the environment from toxic chemicals or toxic waste and those sort of things. None of us want to see that out there in the community doing any damage. But, you know, sometimes I feel like the recycling push tends to go just because it's got to be done in areas that, you know, we've seen the situation where a lot of the plastic bottles end up in China or India or places where we've shipped our problem to other countries or other locations. So I think, you know, landfill, you know, has got to be part of the mix of things that we need to do in the waste management side of things. And I hope that over time we get to have a real, you know, community debate about how best to deal with this in the long term. And by having this organisation, hopefully they'll give us a chance to look at all the costs and all the benefits so that we can actually look at that as a community and make the correct decisions moving forward.
Thanks, Alderman Newington. Other speakers, Alderman Edmonds and then Warren.
No worries. Thank you. I echo some of the comments made by Alderman Ewington about costs of this. So it's obviously set up to harness the available funds that have come through the bin tax. So, but the first fees that are paid on the bin tax are also being spent on setting up a board to administer those funds. So there's a lot of fat cats lining their pockets before anything of any benefit comes from the levy. And Alderman James, I thought you were with me when we voted against the waste levies.
Not at all.
I'll check the minutes.
Please direct comments through the chair.
I rescind the comment. But,
Not at all.
So we've got a lot of, and you know, we've all or maybe we haven't, but you see when the boards are meeting for different GBEs around the state, the type of cars that are driven and clothes that are worn, it'll be the same faces on both these boards before any action happens on FOGO. And indeed, we've already missed out, haven't we, in terms of the first cream off the waste levy has gone to a private business. So I'm really torn because is this the world we live in and we've just got to set up our own board to play with the other board that's been established and splash around in that sandpit? I mean, you know, I struggle with it. And just for the record, I don't know if we have to make this correction or not, but 14.2 point B has bold error reference source not found ... at the end of, point C has a mistake. I would hate to think that we're on that sort of start.
Thanks very much, Alderman Edwards. Other speakers, Alderman Warren, yes, sorry, you were next.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's good to see waste management finally hitting the national stage at a national federal government and a state government who understand the importance of this, and this is the next logical step to look at a strategy for doing it in southern Tasmania. My colleague Alderman Ewington talks about toxic landfill. I'm not quite sure what he's referring to there, and I'm sure he was aware that putting food into landfill is toxic, and over 50% of what goes into landfill is food waste. So we have to be mature about this. We have to recognise that there is a cost to putting stuff into landfill. There's a cost in terms of health and the environment, not to mention the amount of trucks and people that it takes to manage that. And it's really good that Copping now traps that gas and uses it to create power. And I really enjoyed the opportunity to go down and see Copping in action a few weeks ago and realise that we're actually doing world's best practice down there in a number of ways. So we do need to reduce what goes into landfill, and I think it's disingenuous to talk about a bin tax. I think that's like a death tax. You just put the word tax on anything and scare the natives. It's important to say we need to reduce the amount of waste that we throw out. So, you know, the old avoid, reduce, reuse, recycle, and we're not just sending plastic bottles to China, we're developing industries in the country that provide jobs for locals and provide a circular economy. So we talk a lot about on island, so that things that are created here are reused here. You can already see this happening in the manufacturers are way ahead of the government in terms of changing their packaging because of market demand. So there's less plastic, and you know it's nowhere near enough, but we're heading in the right direction. And you will see that happen, and we've been very slow to take it up. So we do need to support any movements in this direction. The waste levy allows us to collect money that can be put back into developing those industries, providing jobs for Tasmanians, reducing the amount of waste, reducing the amount of landfill, and that's got to be a good thing, so I support this.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder.
Thanks, Mayor. Hopefully this will be a body that actually does something concrete, excuse the pun on landfill, about our waste problems. Now, this council, in partnership with a couple of others, set up this world-class landfill site. And it is a world-class landfill site. And yes, it is taking, the C-Cell is taking, hazardous waste, which colloquially would be known as real toxic waste because of its impediment. But we're also surrounded by two councils that continue to dump landfill in the headwaters of creeks that service their cities. I'm talking about Hobart and Glenorchy. When are they going to be required to join the bandwagon and engage in responsible landfill that is for the future. And sure, we can take the FOGO off and turn it into gas, that's all very nice. And sure, we can make compost, which quite honestly, you won't see much of it from our place there because our compost is created at home from the veggie scraps that don't turn up into the landfill bill and are out in the garden. And I'll tell you what, with the way food prices are going at the moment, it doesn't sound like such a bad idea. But so the thing about a lot of the landfill is non-recyclable stuff. It's the soft plastics. And I was so amused to sit up there and watch people in China, or government officials in China and government officials in Indonesia saying, we're not going to take your waste. We're not going to take your contaminated soft plastics wastes anymore. Sorry, 95% of what you're looking at was produced in your country. You wrapped up the goods we bought and sent it down here, and we're sending it back to you, and now you're saying it's our waste, not yours. You're the people who generate it, and if you really want to get serious about this at the national level, we might start to ban the importation of soft plastics as wrapping or as other food containers. Now, you can't get rid of soft plastics completely. I mean, the medical industry, what would it cost today if you didn't have soft plastics and reusable and non-reusable medical equipment? So there is a role for them, but this bulk of it is this packaging stuff. And the solution is in Scandinavian countries, for example, in Sweden, they actually engage in high temperature incineration. They converted some of their old nuclear power plants into high temperature incineration, and that's where most of the hard waste is turned into electricity, to the point where neighbouring countries are actually exporting their waste, not to landfill, but to Sweden to burn, and then having to pay for the electricity their own waste produced. So there's a lot of things to be done in this space, beyond a tax on the landfill, beyond a bin tax, as Alderman Edmonds like to put it, beyond doing a bit of converting a bit of FOGO into compost or gas wastes. So there's a lot of space. But if we continue to tickle around with the same model, that it's a little incremental bit here and a little increment there, that some councils can keep doing something that is simply unsustainable forever and a day, but other councils are going to be held to this high regard, then I think we've messed it up. Perhaps it's time for the state government to step into this space. It's pulling all the strings. Why not take all the responsibility and set up Tas Waste as they did Tas Water and all the other things that councils like this used to do so well. Thank you.
Other speakers? Right, a reply, Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and no, through you, Alderman Mulder, wasn't triggering me with the idea of Tas Waste, which would be a Soviet takeover, and the moral hazard of the fact that we have invested a lot into the copping facility. We have, Kingborough has, Sorell and has Tasman, and those councils in the voting sense comprise just over 39% of this new entity. And I think we are the exemplars of this entity, and I think being part of it will be the opportunity to be constantly pushing for best practice, explaining what we do compared to other councils and moving that forward. And then, again, there's going to be narratives between the three regions, but if you don't do this, then we're going to have very little say as individual fractured councils compared to two other regions in this time of flux, in this time of change. FOGO's come up a bit in this, and there's a variety of FOGOs, and it's heresy, but I keep saying it because it's also factual, that if you're going to do FOGO, you have to do it first rate. Don't just put stuff on a truck and drive up to the middle of the state and put it on windrows. You know, the in-vessel composting, it's some of the other systems, and there's a lot of evolution in this space. And some of the aldermen who went down to Copping will have seen a presentation on this. But you're right, there are things that people can do at the local level. I think, again, Alderman Mulder was alluding to something similar to a worm farm, which our household does. And of course around this table is the renowned environmentalist Alderman Blomley, who used to actually be using it through to the chickens all the way through. So, you know, feeding his family off the scraps, which was good work. So look, as I said, it's a state of flux. This is a way forward. We'll have a say around the table. Hopefully the southern region will be more coordinated. It was intimated that there's plenty of opportunity for improvement with some of the other landfills in this part of the world, and I think that this will just encourage a conversation about how they might utilise copping. So I think we should move forward with this, and I encourage you all to support it.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is that Council approves the proposed rules and authorises the GM to take whatever actions necessary to establish a joint authority. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 9.1, notice of motion, Alderman Moller.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd rise to move the motion that stands in my name.
Do I have a seconder for your motion, Alderman Moller? Alderman James, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This motion is not about winning or losing. It's about principles relating to freedom, principles relation to the power of government to compel its citizens to do things. And in the Parliament, which we are not, this matter would be raised as a matter of public interest for a debate to enable the representatives of the people to express a view around this particular issue. To expect to achieve any outcomes, of course, is long past, with this legislation having passed the Parliament within the magical days of 3 sitting days. I think it's taken us less time to declare war, or more time to declare war. So the Magna Carta constrained what rulers can require of its people. And as the basis of the rule of law, it prescribes what people may do. We are free to do anything that the law does not prohibit or prescribe. Now, generally prescriptive laws telling you what you must do are reserved for where failure to do something relates to good order or the safety of third parties, or indeed, in these days, our planet. And that is why the law prescribes which side of the road you drive on, why there are workplace safety laws, and why, during the pandemic, we were required to wear masks. Failure to vote harms no one, has no 30-party effect, and I would argue has no place in a free society. But the right to vote does carry a responsibility. Not a responsibility to vote, but a responsibility to educate yourself on the issues of the day and who is best placed to represent you before you vote. If you decide not to engage or can't really tell the difference, then perhaps you should not discharge your right to vote. Perhaps this is the reason for so many informal votes in compulsory systems. Is it a question of a pox on both your houses? Australia shares compulsory voting with few other countries. Exceptions are Latin American nations, but the prize for the world's harshest penalties for failing to vote is the so-called Democratic Republic of North Korea. Voting is a peaceful way of changing governing elites, changing the elites who govern us by passing laws. But councils aren't governments. We have no legislative power. Our bylaws are disallowable instruments of the state parliament, not the council. Executive arm of government enforces those laws through departments. And as we enforce our health and dog control laws and planning laws, we are acting as a sub-agency to the various state government departments who are powered to do so by the state parliament. We have been likened to a board of directors. But since when were shareholders forced to vote in board elections? Surely the disengaged are entitled to be left in peace, not forced to choose between Tweedledee and Tweedledum. We are trying to make enthusiasm compulsory. Compulsory voting was introduced to Australia just 98 years ago when low voter turnouts made the government think it lacked legitimacy. But 60% turnout is pretty good by world standards. In France the other day, it was a 48% turnout, with many pundits putting that down to voter fatigue. Is that our case? We've just endured a 6-week election campaign, and guess what? A third of the voters voted early. They wanted it over and done with. Let's get away from it. So, and in our system, with 3 levels of so-called government, we're heading to the polls every year, sometimes twice. Is it any wonder the punters are over it? But under compulsory voting, like the mainland, will we now see party tickets and party campaigning? Will local government become like our independent legislative council, which was once very independent but is now under party control, and those 2 parties got together and rammed this legislation through in 3 sitting days without a debate? We've taken longer to declare war. Rather than why not, the question really should be what purpose is served by making enthusiasm compulsory.
Thanks very much. Alderman James.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I made quite clear that I would like to provide the second to the motion, but at the same time I don't agree that the motion as it stands, and that's my right to be able to speak as to why I support compulsory elections in local government compulsory voting in local council elections. The simple fact of the matter is I had in 1992, when I came back into this place, on my brochure at the time I said I was in favour of compulsory local council elections, because I believe that the people in the community, if they have a right to be able to exercise a vote and make a decision in relation to with the goodwill of the council, then they ought to be expected to line up and vote accordingly. The simple fact of the matter is, in the recent federal election, Tasmania didn't basically go along the national lines of Labor as part of the trend on the national scene. In fact, Tasmania, I believe, will always look at the merits of the situation, and I don't believe that Tasmania, as far as local council elections are concerned, would vote in accordance with a party ticket. There may be some influence within it, but nevertheless, at this stage of the game, I think that those that perform during that course of the election period, then they, in fact, will be able to be judged as to whether or not they performed or have delivered as far as the community is concerned. And those persons who have, in fact, made a contribution over the time, then their name will possibly be not associated with a party platform or ticket, and will be perhaps, I believe, appointed or re-elected in October 2022. And that goes across all of those particular council elections for the 28 councils that are up for election in October 2022. Another point that's been raised in the General Manager's comments, that the amount of what this is going to cost Clarence will be approximately 25 to 35% due to the compulsory voting. Now look, if we're going to have compulsory voting, then there's going to be a cost. We've just spent money, we've decided on the budget, and also every year after the election in 2018, this council had always a budget allocation towards the election in 2022. That has always been the case as far back as I can remember, and prior to 89. We always did that, but we did it under a different method at that time. So look, I think it's great news. People will, okay, there'll be those that will probably just turn up and just cross the paper or vote in the donkey fashion as we know it to be, but at the rest of the community who are concerned about this council or those other councils and how this council has performed or how that council has performed will be judged accordingly at election time. So bring it on, and I hope that we will make the good news, and also too, at the end of the day, those persons who have performed well over the last 4 years will be re-elected.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would have no trouble supporting this motion if it was to express our concern that we were not consulted. No consideration was given to the last time this issue was raised, and LGAT, the Local Government Association of Tasmania, did not support compulsory voting. If this motion was to write a sternly worded letter to the Minister saying we're cross because you didn't ask us, I don't imagine that would achieve anything more than this motion, which says we don't support we don't support compulsory voting. So I'm just not sure what this motion is to achieve. It's not a debate on whether we support compulsory voting or not. It's a debate on whether we tell the Minister we're cross. Or that we, yeah. So I guess in terms of, I'm not sure about compulsory voting at the council level. I'm a strong advocate of it at the state and the federal level. I don't believe that introducing compulsory voting at the council level will increase engagement. I think that's pie in the sky. I think what would be more useful would be to provide more information and engage the community in what councils actually do. And that's something I've tried to do over the last 4 years as I was learning along with the community as to what councils actually do. I've been sharing that information and trying to spread that information as to what councils do and why they're important. And unfortunately, a lot of people only interact with their council when something nasty happens in their backyard for the first time, and they're forced to suddenly find out who does what and what the planning scheme is all about. So, yeah, look, you know, a lot of people would probably think that council is irrelevant to them. I think we could change that perception. I think that the government is obliged to try and change that perception, having made this decision. Yeah, I just don't see that this motion...
Excuse me for a moment, please.
I'm sorry for the interruption.
Oh, okay. I'll take your point. Yeah.
Anything I need to know about?
It's a procedural matter.
Look, it's a procedural matter, and I'm not sure quite how to deal with it at this stage. I'll open the floor when you're finished.
Oh, look, I'm finished. I'm just not sure what this achieves.
My apologies, Alderman.
Alderman Mulder is suggesting if someone moved a procedural motion that he be entitled to withdraw the motion.
I think we'll wait for the debate and then I'll attempt to do as we discuss.
Yes, no, look, gee whiz.
I'm going to do that just
I'm
not moving it now, Mr Mayor. I'm just.
Okay.
I think. Sorry, on a point of personal explanation, my intention was for the debate to go through, for everyone to have their say, and then we will move. But that's. I was just foreshadowing to the Mayor what I was going to do in my summing up.
I don't think we have the possibility of doing that. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. On Wednesday night I looked at this and I thought, geez, no way am I supporting this. And I started to talk to a few ratepayers, and not only ratepayers in this city and other cities. And one of the things they said is, oh God, not another election. You know, we don't have to vote again. Surely not. Now, one of the things I find rather funny with this, you're telling, you know, our ratepayers they've got to vote. But in this council, aldermen, people abstain. They haven't got enough courage to vote. And yet you're taking it out and saying, hey, you've got to vote, you've got to vote. I mean, it's pretty annoying when that's the case. If we get rid of abstentions, I'd say yes, fine, but we haven't. The fact is, there seems to be a rush on this, and what people can't understand is this got through Parliament so quickly, and yet we've got a local government review. If anything, why wasn't the election put off to say next year when the local government review is done and things like this? People, to me, and I don't, look, some are cynical, I know, some are saying to me that the Liberal Party just trying to cover up their the things they've mucked up. We talk about a stadium, we're talking about ferries, now we're talking about local government review, but they're not talking about how to fix a hospital situation, the education system, etc., etc., etc. And if they think that people are going to be fooled by another furphy. I just think this is ridiculous at the moment. I think it's totally being rushed. I mean, when I spoke to the Mayor, you didn't even know this was going through initially. So I think that's pretty poor form. So I didn't think I would, but I'm actually going to support this motion.
Other speakers? Alderman Ewington?
Yeah, very, very quickly, Mr Mayor. Certainly think the process was rushed and could have been handled a little bit better, but I don't think it's a done deal, and what we say or do here is going to make absolutely no difference. But I do agree with anything that increases interest in the mix of local, state and federal government roles and responsibilities and services and budgets and strategies and things like that. I would say is a good thing if it gets people interested and they clearly understand the difference between those things would be great. And I certainly would hope that we don't go down the path of letting party politics get into this situation and take away from our role, which is to represent the community in the basic infrastructure and core services that we provide. When we get party politics involved, I would hate to see that happen. But that's my 2 points worth. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Evans?
Thank you. Look, I'm a big supporter of compulsory voting at local government level as I am at state level and federal level. I don't really see what the difference is. I actually don't want to be a contrarian, but I actually applaud the Minister for making a decision. So many things we deal with here are bogged down. You don't hear back. You get a letter that ducks and weaves like a professional boxer that doesn't really go anywhere. So, look, he obviously had conviction on this and decided to put it through. Could he have consulted more? Yeah, maybe, but that would have held it up and then it would have been on the never to the next election. And I guess that would have been the soft option, is to say, we intend to do this so they don't cop any heat this year, and then it comes through. But no, it's through. I support it. It will certainly keep the local government cognoscenti on their toes. And local government will have to adapt. Is that such a bad thing? I would say no. There's huge cohorts of people not represented in this room. You would only have to spend a bit of time getting to know us to understand that if you went to anywhere basically in a public place and talk to the next 12 people to walk past and go, well, do those 12 and those 12 line up? Probably not. So you've got to try something. I also note that when they passed this, I believe there's money for awareness campaign, and TEC does a pretty good job with those, so I assume they'd go down the same path. The Legislative Council was brought up. That's a body that not a lot of people are necessarily passionate about, but it still gets pretty good turnout when people know that they have to vote rather than that they shouldn't vote. The point about caucusing and party political stuff, that will be interesting to see how that comes up. But look, I'm certainly not verbally anyone, but around this table and others, there are members who are of similar political parties or organisations, and almost the ones you can take to the bank of not agreeing. So I don't think that's an issue. Maybe if tickets start emerging, but indeed that's probably illegal and would quickly get you a rap across the knuckles. Certainly, I don't think that any person in local government is ringing up the state director of a political party they might be a member of and saying, look, mate, I'm just not sure about our policy on this pathetic planning matter. Have you got 3 hours to set aside to help me out? I mean, that sort of stuff I just don't think is happening. And I also take the comment about parties taking over the Legislative Council, but I think that's equally counterbalanced by the quote-unquote comments people make about the teals, that's everyone's favourite political word at the moment, is that in both instances you've seen people who are tired of the way an independent has represented them, or people who are tired of a party political person who's represented them, or people who just have a campaign where they go bare knuckle and someone wins and someone loses. I think at the end of the day you provide as much choice as you can to an electorate and you see where the cards fall. So for that reason I'm totally in support of compulsory voting. Let's see how things go at the end of this year, and if it's a complete disaster, which I'm not sure how it could be, you can always change it for next time.
Other speakers? Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and very briefly, look, I won't support this motion. On balance, I'm probably in favour of compulsory voting at local government. I just find it ironic that in the middle of what's supposed to be a big review of local government and all of the things local government, that this one just gets pushed through without any consultation.
Other speakers? Alderman Walker, thank you.
Thank you. Look, voluntary voting is an article of faith for me. It's totemic. And that's not just at the local government level, that's at federal and state. And I do sometimes laugh when I see people's argument being, we have to have compulsory voting at local government because we matter too, you know, we're important too, you know. Actually, it should be voluntary at all levels. Didn't always hold that view, by the way. At school, I was told that Australia is fortunate to have compulsory voting because everybody has a say on the government. And I accepted that on face value. I didn't think about the downsides or question, you know, after so many years why other democracies hadn't taken it on board. In fact, I think I'm going to invent a new term, but I think I was an Oz-splainer when I was abroad because I would talk up compulsory voting and I'd parrot those same lines from school. And it wasn't until living in New Zealand in 1996 that my views changed. That was getting to go through my first full, full face of what voluntary voting was like. And what were the participation rates in New Zealand in 1996? They were 88%. Australia was 97%, but you know that wasn't a big difference. And the big difference for me was that because it was voluntary, because voters were doing so freely without the threat of a monetary penalty, they were engaged and they were invested when casting their votes. They were just as passionate as Australia, but tell you what, the debates are more civil and nuanced. And one of the really tedious lines that compulsory voting advocates dole out is, at state and federal elections, that you don't even need to vote. All you have to do is go there and have your name marked off. No, there's I think at least 4 legal cases that have been upheld that actually dispel that. It's just a simple fact that it's very hard to prove who did what. And then if you think about that, voting is so sacrosanct that we all must be compelled to vote. How do the same advocates seem totally ambivalent about the fact that people just turn up or that ballot papers are spoiled or left blank? That's just one of those lines that no one ever really challenges. It's just parroted and parroted and parroted. I mean, I think we should all aspire to see more people voting in elections, but they should be doing so freely and willingly. And I'm going to take some convincing that compulsory voting, makes elections more democratic. And yes, councils pay the TEC to conduct elections. This idea that they're a benevolent institution that just do it because they love doing it, no, it's all bottom line ratepayer dollars. And we've got some estimates that it's going up by 30%, but we don't actually know. And there's been some overtures about the costs of enforcement being covered, but we don't actually know. And look, one of the concerns that I actually have is around literacy rates. And I say this because it's different with local government voting because it hinges largely on people having to decide from these little tiny statements with 600 characters or less. And that I don't think is awesome. I haven't heard what's going to be done to be more engaging with people that might find that challenging. I think you could be a reader of Shakespeare and everything, but many of us have poor vision and the statements are tiny. There's all these elements that I'd like to see some work done on how, if you're sincere about engaging voting, what you're actually doing to help on that level. What is the actual problem that compulsory voting is being expected to solve, and what evidence has been given to us that compulsory voting elsewhere is delivering better local government? I can talk about the fact that what are we going to do if the rates don't increase? Because I know that whilst last election in Victoria, the rates went up, the 2 previous ones, there were councils there that had participation rates below 50%, even though there's a $70 fine. So have we decided that we're going to take people's licences away? What level of coercion will we be prepared to go for to match whatever the participation rate is being aimed for? And the participation rate has not been named up that's being aimed for because I think it should be. There's a lot of effort going, and that's just in the in the ephemera. So, what remaining time I have left, I'm going to quote from an article of a Mornington lad who stood in the last local government elections here in Clarence, who I would probably disagree with on stacks of issues. But let me tell you, this guy, Tom Allen, is right on the money when it comes to voluntary voting. And his primary reason was freedom. That non-compulsory voting at Tasmania's local government level is the state's only election area where voters are free to choose to vote or not. For many, abstaining is a conscious decision for a whole host of reasons, including not wanting to be seen to legitimise a process that they have doubts about, or because they dislike the candidates or their policies. How many Tasmanians cast a vote for a council candidate they had no idea about? The second reason is because it lets politicians off the hook. Voter apathy is a growing problem. Most Australians now think it makes no difference which party is in power, and worryingly, 40% think democracy is no longer the best form of government. These figures mark a decline in the appeal of democracy.
Alderman Kendi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What an interesting night. It's been so many stories, from people gardening to, oh my goodness. Anyway, the motion before us, I think compulsory voting on the simplest terms without going on for 5 minutes is that it will remove a lot of the confusion from the public. With layers of government, they're not quite sure whether they're supposed to vote in local government or not. So I think that's one thing that's positive. The only thing that concerns me slightly, is brought upon us fairly quickly, and there will be dollars associated with it. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? In that case, Alderman Mulder. Alderman Van Berto.
I'd like to speak, Mr. Mayor. Mayor, I won't be supporting the motion as it stands, and for the following reasons. Local government's often termed a child of the state government. In Tasmania, the imprimatur for setting up the local government system was provided by Section 45A1 of the Tasmanian Constitution Act 1934. And that says, there shall be in Tasmania a system of local government with municipal councils elected in such manner as Parliament may from time to time provide. We have the Local Government Act 1993, and we have various other acts and regulations that determine local government operations, including elections. And Council was recently advised by the Minister for Local Government, Nick Street, that the Local Government Amendment Elections Act 2022 was passed by both houses of Parliament, meaning that voting will be compulsory for all individuals enrolled on the House of Assembly electoral roll, and that voting will also be simplified so that voting is only required for 5 candidates. He noted in his letter to us that this issue has been well canvassed for many years and that it's a step forward for democracy. So, compulsory voting is now law in Tasmania. Whether we like it, this council, whether other councils like it or not. And I have to say that in the time that I've been on council, there's been a number of occasions, and I'm sure before I was on council, there's been occasions where compulsory voting via LGAT, the Local Government Association of Tasmania, has not been supported by the majority of councils. But I also have to note that in the time that I've been on council, I don't remember there being any public consultation as to whether or not voting should be compulsory. So it's really been the members of council that have determined whether or not a council has a position as to compulsory voting or not. The arguments that have been put forward by Alderman Mulder have many cogent alternatives. The idea that there should be freedom not to vote, some of the other aldermen have touched on that. a way not to vote. In fact, there's a number of ways not to vote. One is spoiling the ballot paper. Another is donkey voting. Another is not voting at all and paying a fine, knowing that you will have to pay a fine because it is compulsory. So in that sense, there is freedom. We get into the territory of rights and responsibilities. And it's interesting that political participation is the basis, or one of the bases, for democracy. And it's a vital part of involvement in democracy. And it's also a very important aspect of human rights, which has been detailed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's the idea that better representation of the whole community is available if all members of that community participate in electing its representatives. Rather than supporting this motion, what I believe we as a council need to be considering and working with the state government on is such matters as how will this polling occur? Will it be in person rather than by postal voting? Will there be electronic voting? Will people younger than 18, perhaps down to 16, be able to vote?
Thank you, Alderman von Berto. Other speakers? Alderman Mulder, right to reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A number of issues have cropped up and like most things, there's assumptions that if we force people to the ballot box, it's going to increase engagement was one. Sorry, I'm not too sure how forced... Well, engage with the ballot box or with a postal envelope, but that's about it. I mean, today we've got one of the greatest voting systems, I think, in form of postal voting, where 100 words, if you remember to put them in, 100 words, and then you can... you get your name there and you have then equal status with everyone else. In fact, you could run for local government without spending a cent. How engaged or equitable can that be? But engaging with people is engaging them in the contest of ideas, engaging them in the thing and showing them that you have a different way or you have a better way or that the way you're going is the right way to go. That's what it's supposed to be about. Not forcing them to vote tribally because they're forced to vote, or not forced to do, or forced to break the law by spoiling their ballot paper. Speaking of which, I suspect you're going to see an awful lot of that, which will give you an indication of what the public thinks about compulsory voting. So, I missed the interjection, but I'm sure it was humorous, and I'm sure I'll catch up.
Please don't get distracted, Alderman.
So, increasing diversity was one of the arguments I had. Sorry, the diversity around this chamber is determined by who nominates. Not who votes, but who nominates. If you want diversity in the chamber, if you feel you're unrepresented or your particular segment of the community is unrepresented, then nominate someone to be on council so that your section can vote for them. You don't get it just by making everyone vote. So, it was interesting to see that also on the side that elected representatives are in the normal practice of rushing to the party secretary to get advice on matters rather than their cabinet colleagues. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. Then there was a talk about how strong were the Teals. Yes, they were. Just imagine how strong they would have been if the rusted on and disengaged who vote tribal hadn't voted at all. We would then have seen, under non-compulsory voting, a much bigger reaction back towards the centre, and a moving away from the polarisation that has bedevilled the parties, I think. So there is a way through, but it's more likely to happen if you're only consulting the engaged. Now, the Legislative Council, which got a run, it had a proud tradition of doing things in its own time, but that was when it was controlled by independents. I still remember the president of Sue Smith, the Honourable Sue Smith, who is leading the review, talking about...
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. So the motion before the chair is Alderman Mulder's motion. All those in favour? Against? The motion is lost. Moving on to item 10, Alderman's question time. 10.1 and 10.2, there's nothing on the agenda there. 10.3, answers to questions without notice from the previous council meeting. Answers are in the agenda. Take those as read.
Mr Mayor, I have last questions at this stage at 10.3.
Sure.
Thank you. I just reference on page 171 the two answers to the questions that I asked 3 weeks ago. The first one references the safety audit for the Wombat Crossing in Lincoln Street, Lindisfarne. We were told 3 weeks ago that that report was due to be with council within that week. I'm just wondering where that's now at and why, if we do have it, could that please be provided to elected members?
Mr Graham?
Through Mr Mayor, I've approved that report through the GM to go to Alderman.
I approved it this afternoon, so it's on this one.
Great, thank you. Mr Mayor, the second question I have in this area regards the second question that I asked, and that is the issue, the urgent issue that I had over 3 weeks ago that was actually initially an Alderman's request to the General Manager asking for urgent advice regarding our long-standing elderly residents of Derwent Avenue. Wednesday night we received these papers. We've got a paragraph answer here, but I'm just concerned, Mr Mayor, that, and I note from my Alderman's weekly request update, a draft response has been with Mr Graham since last Wednesday. Could I urgently please be provided with a copy of that advice?
Mr Graham?
Mr Mayor, I thought that one had been approved a week or so ago from my end, but I'll follow up on that. Yeah.
I don't recall seeing it.
Yep. Okay, follow that up as a matter of urgency. Thank you, Alderman Blom.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Moving on to item 10.4, questions without notice. Can I start with you, Alderman Warren?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Alderman James?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Two questions. Firstly, I refer to the Minister for Planning's letter regarding the land use strategy urban growth boundary at 52 Richardson's Road. So my question through you to Mr Lovell. Mr Lovell, it appears, and I quote, unfortunately Lauderdale and by extension the immediately adjacent portion of Sanford that is subject to the proposed urban growth was not included in the scope of the Greater Hobart Plan for the purpose of either data gathering or strategic planning. Is this basically the end of it now for the time being, and will it be appropriate for Council to advise the public as to what the Minister has said in this correspondence?
Through Mr Mayor, the Minister has set the matter aside. It's not a final decision, so he's pending the outcome of certain studies. But we have informed the applicant. There's a copy of the Minister's letter, and we've published the Minister's letter on the website so that other parties are aware of the current situation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The second question is in relation to Council's situation in relation to the Shambroad and Council's discussion regarding the imminent substantial commencement of the hotel and training centre at Kangaroo Bay. What stage are we at, and have Shambroad made any approaches to Council as to whether to obviously sell on their share to a third party or to basically start a substantial commencement by the due date of the 17th of October 2022, or around about that date?
Thank you, Alderman James. At this stage, I haven't got any further information on what I provided the last time, which is, but I do note that there's General Manager and I have one of those quarterly briefing reports coming up later this month, and I'd be very happy to keep Council apprised of whatever information I discover.
That's splendid, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
Oh, I wasn't sure. I've got two. Re the ferry parking report per Alderman James's recent motion. Just wanted to check when we should expect to see those findings and who's responsible for it. And do we have a status update on where things are at?
Through Mr Mayor, we're obtaining information over the next couple of weeks, finalising our parking surveys, and DSG are assisting us with some parking survey information, and also we're receiving passenger ferry service information as well, aiming to compile that in July to come to an August workshop with Alderman.
It's worth sending your questions through sometimes, isn't it? Thank you very much. That's a great answer. And the other one is we obviously have the decision about FOGO at 13th of December last year, an update on where we are around that decision.
Through you, Mayor. In the intervening period, the Copping Joint Authority had applied for a grant as a part of that early stage of the waste levy in order to build a business case for FOGO at the Copping site. That was unsuccessful. That went to another private organisation. From a council officer's point of view, we have over past months been focused on the curbside waste collection contract and that changeover. We've also been involved in the contracting for the recycling facility that's recently been tendered, and tonight council has approved the joint authority the rules. That joint authority will have that contract transferred to it to operate on behalf of the 12 Southern Councils. So there's been a fair bit of effort around that. We're at this point looking at other scope options in terms of council's waste strategy, and that'll include the business case for FOGO. But because of those other activities, we haven't progressed to that yet.
Alderman Von Berto, do you have any questions, please?
Yes, just one, Mr Mayor. In light of the response to a question I asked at the last council meeting, which is detailed earlier in this meeting's agenda, what measures have and or will be undertaken to immediately remedy the non-compliance of the sole access external stairway to the second floor of Alma's Activity Centre, currently tenanted by the Hobart FM 96.1 radio station? Bearing in mind, council was advised of the non-compliance with access determined by Australian standards in 2017, and this was reiterated in January 2018, Preston Lane's Alma's Existing Conditions Report, which details recommended interventions and make good costs.
Thank you, Alderman Von Berto. General Manager.
Thank you for the further question regarding Alma's. We won't be taking any action regarding those stairs. Any action that's required is required when renovations are undertaken to bring up to current standards, but existing standards apply as the date of that original build. So there are no plans.
I can add to that that given tonight's budget has now gone through, that this council will be moving helping the radio station move to a safer site as soon as possible. Alderman Von Berto. Alderman Blomley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I refer to the Alderman request update I received on Friday, and note that my request REQ 2022-055805 of the 4th of April regarding drainage issues at 35 Honeywood Drive, Sandford. I further note that this was assigned to Asset Management, draft response underway on the 3rd of June, nearly 2 months later. Could you please advise, Mr Mayor, when I'm likely to receive a response to this Alderman's request?
Thank you. General Manager.
Thank you. We send out Alderman request updates every week for Alderman to allow you to provide us with any urgency requests. I'm not aware that we've received one in respect to that. We've been significantly affected by staffing shortages because of COVID and other illnesses, so we are doing our best to keep up.
Mr Mayor, last Monday, being the 6th, I sent an email to both the General Manager and the elected members' request email asking for information about council master plans, and this request does not appear on the Alderman request update that was sent to me on Friday of last week, some obviously 4 or 5 days later. I think it necessary that I place on the record the content of that request, and that is, Mr Mayor, and this is to the General Manager, can you or one of your team please assist with the following questions re master plans? Please list all the master plans the Council is dealing with at present, including A, when initiated, B, at what stage they are at and when likely to be completed, C, requirement for outside/consultant assistance, and D, costs involved to finalise plan or plans. Please also accept this query as notice that I intend to move a motion on notice at the next Council meeting, the 4th of July. Mr Mayor, can this request please now be taken as another urgent request and actioned as a matter of urgency?
Through you, Mayor, I took that request from you. I understood that it was an email request to me. I didn't see it as an Alderman's request, and we undertook to do that work. There is a significant body of work to compile all that information. We'll do it as soon as we possibly can.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, in Alderman Mulder's motion, I did raise the point about abstaining when we're now having forced people to do compulsory voting. Now, abstentions, is that just our council or is that a statutory regulation?
It's now the law, yep. And all councils have compulsory voting.
Yeah, no. I mean abstentions. I mean from Alderman.
Sorry.
Abstentions. When an Alderman abstains,
yeah.
And now I'm saying that why should Alderman abstain now we're making compulsory voting? Now, what my question to you...
Alderman Pearce, I'll take that as a rhetorical question. There are different laws and regulations.
No, I just asked that. But look, what I would like to do, Mayor, I don't believe we should have abstentions.
Look, this is an opportunity for questions, not opinion.
I'm just going to say, I'm just going to ask a question to the General Manager. Would that be appropriate to put a notice of motion to remove abstentions, except in certain areas, like if it's a code of conduct or...
I can
ask the General Manager that one?
No, I'll take that, Alderman Pearce. The answer is very simple. If you want that thought to go forward, we need to lobby through LGAT to have a change to the regulations to the Local Government Act.
Well, that's what I meant, Mayor. A motion on notice and then it goes through.
It's always within your authority to put a notice of motion.
Thank you, Mayor.
For any council meeting on any subject.
Thank you, Mayor.
Almost.
Almost.
Alderman Walker.
Thank you. My first question relates to performance budgeting, a motion that was, if not unanimously passed, very, very close to being unanimously passed last year. I note that we had a transition in CFO and that might have disrupted the process for the budget just been. But given that motion was passed, what assurances can you give me that those actual steps that were agreed to, that all the work that was done by staff to look at how it could be done, that we will actually, that the future council will see that as part of the 2023-24 budget?
Gentlemen.
I would need to review the commitments that we made regarding that and see where we're at. I can't off the top of my head recall how far through we were or whether we committed to take any action at all.
We'll take that on notice.
Sure. Maybe this question's been asked before, but just walking past the standard notice of development application that was posted on a property over the weekend, I'm wondering what the capacity would be and as well as what the administrative burden would be when council creates these signs to actually also potentially include a QR code so somebody walking by can actually see straight away what's being proposed as opposed to a nebulous alterations to dwelling or whatever. I think that would be a value add for probably not a lot of administrative burden.
Interesting question. We'll certainly take that on notice. Thank you. Alderman Yerington.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I suppose this one sort of ties in with my discussion about budget and delays on things to a certain extent, and I've sort of been wanting to ask this for a fair while, but noting that I put forward a motion about reviewing the Bellreef Beach Master Plan and looking at the cafe and restaurant, DDA compliant toilets and showers and all those sorts of things down there back in 2 years ago. Obviously, I'd like to know where we're at with that and whether what work's being done in relation to the master plan, and or looking at the operational options in terms of public-private situation with the...
Without going into too much detail, can I ask where we are with the master plan for the Bellreef Beach?
Through you, Mr Mayor. So our landscape architect is just completing the tender drawings for the South Arm Oval Playground. So the berm at South Arm is coming near to completion.
This is Bellreef Beach.
And our landscape architect's next priority is the Bellreef Beach Master Plan. So first of all, we'll pull all the master plans together, assess that, and then come to an Alderman workshop to discuss.
Okay.
So the short answer is we haven't had the resources to do any work on that master plan yet.
And the next, and secondary to that is, looking at the model of the public-private partnership and operations and land use by a private operator, potentially a private operator to the cafe restaurant side of things.
Nothing done on that either.
We need the master plan first, I guess.
Right, thank you.
Alderman Kennedy.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I ask a question which I asked several weeks ago, or several meetings ago. In regard to the commitment now of both federal parliament and now the elections of both federal parties, and now that the election is over, it relates to the promise of further ferry infrastructure at 2 additional locations, including extra stuff. My question still remains, does anyone know whether that means just a wharf for a ferry to tie up, or does that commitment cover on-ground infrastructure like parking, etc., which is my concern that would be foisted upon local government if it's not covered in the commitment?
Are you happy to take that?
Yes, thank you for the question. We don't know the detail of what the extent of those commitments are yet. They will obviously need to be subject to discussion with the Department of State Growth.
And we won't be... it's not possible for us to commit to council without council making a decision.
Keep parking at home. Could I be, and it's obviously not immediately, but in apropos our discussions about the 4.8 rate rise, could I be provided with the residential rate for a standard, say, $400,000 residence in both Kingborough and Glenorchy? And I do note that I think one of those 2 councils uses assessed annual value, but what I'm talking, and some others use capital, so there is that little bit of a difficulty. But if we went to a $400,000 house and it was, although it may have been rated on assessed annual value, the capital value would still be there. So could some inquiries be made of those other councils as to what the actual rate, or how much money, how much dollars those occupants of those houses or owners of those houses are paying in rates for what I would suggest would be a reasonably standard house?
We are having a workshop shortly regarding our rating policy, and it would be useful information if we could have that sort of information available. Is that possible?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and get that information from the other councils. We've got some contacts, so we should be able to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, I say that because in 2017 a similar exercise was done by the local government office, as I recall, but that went across various councils.
Is this a second?
Complicated.
Is this a second question?
Clarification to try to save the staff a massive amount of work, Mr Mayor, unless you'd like me.
Well, thank you for your assistance, Alderman Mulder. That brings us to the conclusion of the open meeting. So thank you very much. Could I ask that the feed be closed, please? Thank you.